and welcome to another episode of Today and Tomorrow in Scottsdale with me. I'm Don Henninger, and with Kevin and Mr. Voting King.
Yeah.
Kevin Maxwell.
It's election day.
It's election day. This podcast will be posting on election day. Finally.
Yeah.
I am ready.
Are you weary?
I'm weary. I'm ready. I'm anxious. I'm ready for it to be over. I'm ready to begin whatever the next wave of work is after the elections are over.
Yeah. And let's talk about that for a second, because I want to kind of flip the script a little bit today. You've been doing such great work, Don, with out in the community. I don't think people know how much work you've been going through in the last 2 years. First of all, you were invited to participate in the Carter Center project out of Atlanta. And that led to the Arizona Democracy Resiliency Network, right?
Correct. Yep.
Right. And then that spun off into different groups that you're involved with, all focusing on the election, safety of the election, integrity of the election, and getting the word out about how our elections are safe, fair, and accurate. And so today I'd like to talk with a little bit. I'll be the person mostly ask the questions, but I want to talk about all the work that you do. One of the things I want to mention, you are the first of all, for a long time, I think 5 years now, you've been the executive director of the Scottsdale Coalition of Today and Tomorrow.
That's right.
Okay. Is that about 5 years have been?
You know, Kevin, I think it's almost 8 years now. It's been a long time. Yeah.
Oh, my
time
goodness.
flies, man.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And you know, the mission of the Scott is to educate the public about issues, and this podcast is an offshoot.
Right.
It's one of the byproducts of the Scottsdale Coalition tomorrow. You also do a really great roundtable every couple Wednesdays a month, where you bring people together. It's about educating people, getting some inside knowledge about local stuff, including elections and you know, all kinds of things. So Scott's a very valuable component to our community.
Yep. And the Scott piece, Kevin, is really nice because this is like our 143rd, I think, podcast episode, all different people, all Scottsdale people, all Scottsdale issues. And one of the primary reasons we set that group up was to be a positive influence, a positive voice for the city.
Right.
Because there's so much good stuff to talk about.
Amazing.
And we've gone through an election season, we'll talk about this in a minute, where a lot of folks are campaigning on what's wrong with Scottsdale.
Right.
You know, no place is perfect, but there's nothing wrong with Scottsdale.
It's great here. You know, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago on a podcast how the restaurants are bustling. The weather's turning nice. I go to the mall, go to the Fashion Square Mall, walk around.
I know.
I mean,
it's crazy.
I know there's you know, it's hard times for a lot of people, but there's a lot of people who are doing it thriving too.
Absolutely. And our city is the envy of the state.
Yeah.
It's a city, and we keep talking about this formula over and over again. Low taxes, amongst the lowest in the entire valley.
Yep.
High value of the quality of services. The city services we have are second to none. We all know that. And property values, which continue to increase all the time. That formula makes Scottsdale unique. It's a unicorn.
Yeah, it does have some bad byproducts, where, for example, it's harder for families to live here. We've talked about this a million times.
Yes.
It makes Scottsdale not as affordable for some people. And unfortunately, they have to go, people who work here, your first responders, educators, may have to live in other parts of the valley. We'll find a solution to that eventually. People are talking about it all the time. But yeah, that last part about property values are rising does have a little bit of a byproduct.
I'm totally right. It's one of the reasons that Scottsdale is not perfect. We do have some issues. There's no question about that. And, you know, you'd be Pollyanna to say that you don't. But the point is, this is a pretty good city. What drives me nuts, maybe we can start talking in our election wrap up, if you will, today, a little bit about Scottsdale's elections first, since we're on that topic now. And what I don't like, and I'm not going to name any names, and everybody's voted now anyway, by the time they listen to this, but I'm a big turnoff when I look at candidates that make their campaign platforms about all negative, about what's wrong with the city and how it's headed in the wrong direction. And if we don't elect me, I'm going to correct things right away and make things finally good. Well, you know what? They already are good.
Yeah. And it seems like I've been getting a lot of mail that's negative mail about people in nonpartisan races. For example, you know, city council, school board races, things like that. I get negative ads in my mailbox every day. And I'm like, that shouldn't be. No, you know, you can focus on negative, but a lot of people, that's where they go. And people do negative campaigning because, unfortunately, sometimes it works. But I hope it doesn't in this case because we got a lot going on. We've got some pretty critical races, obviously, for mayor. Mm-hmm. We don't know how that's going to turn out, but it looks like it's a pretty close race. 2 more council members to elect. So we'll see how that pans out. And then the other
big race for people in Scottsdale is the Scottsdale Unified School District Governing Board.
That's right.
And it's going to be curious to see how that turns out, because that's been a race, as you know, that's kind of like two platforms against each other, three candidate platforms in each case. And they're trying to vote as a block. And we'll see, will they go together as a block? Will the block be split up a little bit? So 2 from one and 1 from the other win, that kind of deal?
Yeah.
It's going to be very curious to see how that plays.
Another interesting phenomenon for me is, I don't know if you've been watching NBC News, but Joe Dana, the local reporter here, has been doing these little spotlights on school board races. And he's been going to the school district meetings. And it seems like what's going on in Scottsdale is being mirrored around the valley, where you have 3 candidates on one side who are generally conservative, and you have 3 other candidates on the other side. Seems like there's a lot of 6-person races for school board, and they're both diametrically opposed.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think it goes to the point where school boards are important.
Yeah.
And that's right at the ground level of local government. There's local issues, our kids, how we're treating our, training and teaching our kids. And it's become so contentious.
Yeah.
With groups like Moms of Liberty in the background, showing up at school board meetings, disrupting things. And again, on those campaigns, who's talking about the right issues? And the right issues are our kids and our teachers and our staffs.
Yeah. And usually when they talk about that, they talk about parental rights as a big issue, right? So, I should be able to tell my kid what they're learning and could have some control over that. And I think everybody probably agree with that. But when it gets dangerous, when it takes it to a different level where they're questioning teachers' their value.
Yeah.
And those, I think our teachers are wonderful.
Yep.
Some probably better than others, but they're definitely trained professionals, and it's great.
Yep. And SUSD is another perfect example of a district that's really, is it perfect? Of course not. Is it good? Absolutely. It's one of the best. And again, negative campaigning, all this wrong with our schools. Come on, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got some things that we got to do better, but we're all, all in all, we're doing pretty well.
Yeah. And going back to what I was saying earlier about affordability, that shrinks enrollment. And we have a lot of charter schools in Scottsdale.
We do.
A lot of private schools, a lot of charter schools, a lot of different types of schools in Scottsdale. And whenever I hear something critical about SUSD, it's always about declining enrollment. And I don't think they can't really do anything about that.
Well, interesting stat too, which is, we'll talk more maybe about campaign spending in general in a second, but I saw an interesting stat just the other day that talked about how much money it takes now to run a successful campaign for school board. And in Scottsdale, SUSD, the average money raised and to be spent on campaigning in this election cycle was $40,000 a candidate.
Per candidate.
The race, a couple of years ago, and the years before that, the average was $5,000.
Yeah, and we have PACs forming now too for school board races.
We do.
When's the last time you saw? Has it never happened before? Has it?
Nope, not that I know of.
Political action committees formed for school board races.
Yeah,
it's getting really intense.
It is, and the at stake with SUSD is the future of leadership in the district with the superintendent. Who's doing Dr. Menzel doing a great job right now, and he may, depending on which way this election goes, if the slate that's anti-Menzel wins, they've got 3 votes against him, and he's probably short term.
Yep, exactly.
And that'd be totally unfortunate for the district.
Yeah, catastrophic.
The other issue in Scottsdale, which I'm concerned about, is the 2 propositions. And I'm supportive of the tax for the preserve. I'm supportive of that and hope it passes. But the other one that's getting not as much attention that I worry about is the spending limiter, the expenditure limit proposition.
Right.
About 491, I think it is, that it's a no-brainer, needs to happen. And actually, the Maricopa Community College District has the same thing.
Yes, they do.
They need to change state law to allow them. It's not a tax increase.
No.
They're not going to spend any more money than they already are. It just lifts the limit to which they can spend to gauge for inflation and increasing costs, so they can spend the money they already have.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
It's a no-brainer, and I'm just not sure. I'm not sure how it's going to work.
Yeah, it's been, and that's another issue. It's been portrayed as a tax raise.
Yeah, that's right.
Increase, and it's really not. If you look at it, it kind of may seem like it because they could spend more money than they have in the past. But it's money they already earned through revenues.
You've been side by side with me for all these years, and I'm just kind of to the point now where I'm just kind of I'm burned out on all this election stuff, all that's been going on. Glad I'm doing it. I'm going to keep working on it, but it's been 3 years now. I've been working for the Carter Center.
I know, is it? And what's really different in this election also is the AI has come into the picture, right?
Yep.
We never had AI before. Now we have. And I thought I read somewhere it was illegal to have a campaign ad using generative AI. And I've seen some pictures and images, and some manipulated films and stuff like that. They use AI generated content. And obviously, I must have misunderstood that or whatever.
I think you're actually onto something. I think the question becomes, how do you prove it?
Yeah.
I'm not well versed in that particular topic, so I'm not sure. But I do know that the whole issue of AI, as it relates to elections and everything else in our lives, for that matter, we're just at the front. The starting line of that.
Yeah.
It's just going to continue on whatever road it's going to be on. We're just going to have to pay attention to that.
Right. Well, what are you talking about first? You want to talk about local elections, or you want to go into your democracy resilience network stuff?
So let's start with the democracy resilience network, just to get some background on that. So that's a program of the Carter Center out of Atlanta. Jimmy Carter's, he set that up when he left office, decades ago. He just turned 100 years old. By the way, he's been in hospice for over a year. He said he wanted to live long enough to turn 100 and vote for Kamala, which he did. And now we'll see how long he lasts.
Right.
Because since he's already voted,
he's
obviously.
Such a treasure.
He is a treasure. But the Carter Center has been doing democracy work across the world for decades to sustain and build democracies in countries, third world countries mostly. And then in 2020, they saw what happened here. They said, wait a minute. We have some real threats to democracy right here where democracy should be king. And so they turned their attention inward, and they decided to focus on 6 states and build networks in 6 states with people who could stand up in support of fair, safe, and secure elections and to mitigate any potential for violence that's out there, which unfortunately we'll talk about in a minute, exists, particularly here in Arizona.
Right.
So we've got a network in Arizona. We're called the Arizona Democracy Resilience Network. That's the offshoot from the Carter Center. There's similar networks in 5 other states: Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And we're all operating in a similar vein. In Arizona, we've got about 300 people in our network statewide. I'm the leader on the Republican side in Phoenix. My partner is Ron Barber, former congressman in Tucson on the Democratic side. Ron, it's one of the joys of this work over the past 3 years has been getting to know Ron. He's a jewel. We're like brothers of a different mother.
Yeah, really.
He was with Gabby Giffords.
Yes.
He was her chief of staff basically when Gabby was shot.
Yeah, he was on staff. He was on site when it happened.
He was on site and he was shot too.
Yeah, he was. Oh, he was.
And he almost lost his life.
Really?
He was shot in the leg, right near an artery, and it could have gone either way. But luckily, he survived, and he wasn't shot in the head like Gabby was, so he had mental capacity where Gabby didn't. Ron still walks with a limp, but he ran for Congress and to take up the rest of Gabby's term, and won re-election after that. And then he was defeated after that. But Ron's a delightful guy. So we built up this network, cross-partisan, leans a little bit left because that's the perception you get when you look at the Carter Center, because it's, Jimmy Carter, he was a Democrat. But it's a cross-partisan network, and we've been going for 3 years. And we were basically formed as the networks in the other 5 states were for this year's election.
Right.
What we've discovered over the past 2 or 3 years is that, we need to work on this year's election, but the threats that are posed to our democracy and even the fears of potential violence aren't going to go away after this election. So there's a chance that this network in Arizona and probably in the other states as well will last for a while longer. I don't know how much longer, but we're all going to go back and meet with each other in January in Atlanta to share notes and to plot the future. So the fact that we're going back to plot the future says we're going to be working on this for a while longer, because the truth is the threats to democracy aren't going away with this election.
Oh, absolutely not.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
So what do we do going forward? So we've got a network where we do training with the network so that we can have a network where when we see mis and disinformation or the threats of some potential violence throughout Arizona, we can connect with each other. We can alert people that need to know. We can do media messaging. We can get out on social media with messaging, get in front of legacy media and traditional media as well, maybe talk to law enforcement, just have a viral network if people are paying attention to what's happening in their communities.
Okay. Now, how would you be notified if you thought that the violence threat was really escalated to a point where you thought violence was almost certain?
Well, unfortunately, it's already happened. It's certainly intimidation has already happened.
Yeah.
If you look at what happened in Tempe, the Democratic field office in Tempe, in a strip center over there that for 3 weeks in a row, they've caught the suspect now, but for 3 weeks in a row, he would shoot through their windows, bullets through their windows in the middle of the night. That happened 3 times. He's finally caught. And when he was caught, they also discovered a cache of 120 weapons, including machine guns and grenade launchers in his house.
He was well armed.
Well armed. And he was the one putting up signs, derogatory signs to Jewish people and whatnot, and certainly anti-democrat, anti-Dem signs. And then he was caught. He was arrested.
Oh, is that right? I hear that part.
Yeah, and he had bags of white powder substance that were on these signs he was posting on trees and poles, and particularly in the Ahwatukee area. And lining the signs were razor blades. So they were glued to the signpost. So if you were to go up and grab a sign to pull it down, guess what?
No, really?
And then behind that were bags of white powder that said, "You better not sniff this," or something like that, just to put, messages that made it look like they were poisonous, but turned out to be baking soda. So that was not a threat. But he was arrested. So that's one thing I would mention. There's another. This is kind of funny how this works. So, a couple of weeks ago, somebody non-political set fire in a regular U.S. postal mailbox. So happened that there were 20 ballots in that mailbox they discovered.
Oh, really?
But it was an idiot who just decided he was going to set some fire to a mailbox, set it on fire. He was caught, and he said it was not political, but it did burn some ballots up. And as soon as that happened, guess what happened in some of the social media circles around town?
Reelection.
Conspiracy theories. They're burning our ballots. And then guess what happened after that?
What?
Copycat stuff in Oregon, Nevada, and I believe Virginia, where people actually set fire not to mailboxes, but to drop boxes.
Okay, yeah.
Which is where you put just for ballots. So now you have the threat of people saying, who knows what happens on election night, or what that could be today, or even in following days. Ways to disrupt the process and ways that make it look like there's a conspiracy when there's not. It's people doing bad things.
Right.
Kind of scary.
Yeah.
The other thing I would mention is with the Carter Center, we've got some partners, including one. It's called Bridging Divides Initiative. It's based out of Princeton University back in New Jersey. And this is an outfit that's equipped basically to monitor the potential for political violence in every single county in the country. And so they've got operations in every state. And they have a matrix that they use to gauge the potential for violence, political violence and intimidation in those counties. Guess what county was number one in the entire country?
What?
Maricopa.
Really?
So the potential through their findings, through the potential for violence and political violence, intimidation was this was the number one county in the country. So we're a hotbed for potential bad acts from people who want to make things disruptive or just upset with the way things are going. So one of the things that we're trying to do with the Arizona Democracy Resilience Network is say, how do we watch for that? How do we mitigate it when we see it? Who do we reach out to? How do we talk to each other? How do we train each other to be on alert? And so we've done a bunch of training programs for our network on how to do that.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what's this? You were in January, you're going to D.C.?
Yep.
Okay.
Going to D.C. in December.
Oh.
There's an institute out of Johns Hopkins University called the Agora Institute. And what they've been doing, it's a conservative group, so it's Republican leaning. And so it's all about, it's not so much party as it is conservative values. And what they've been doing across the country is going and setting up meetings in states across the country of conservative leaders to talk about where they are now that the Republican Party, the official Republican Party, in so many of our states has been sort of, well, let's just say it's dysfunctional. And it's not the same as it was. And you have traditional Republican and conservative leaders in Arizona and the rest of these states that they find that they don't have a home in the Republican Party anymore.
Right.
So the idea was, how can conservative-minded people work in concert to promote election safety and security and to promote conservative principles once you get past the election? So they had a meeting here at the McCain, with the McCain Institute and another national organization called R Street, all conservative-leaning groups. Had a meeting in April with about 35 conservative leaders, day-long meeting down at ASU. I was there with about 35 other people. 3 of us decided we were going to sort of band together and see if we couldn't keep the momentum alive, and that led to some other work along the way. But the point is, the Agora Institute has stayed in touch with us since that convening, as well as similar groups in 5 or 6 other states. And they're looking for ways to continue the work they're doing after the election. So we're going to go back and meet with other people who've been part of the Agora effort in December in DC and talk about how can we keep some of this momentum alive, depending on what happens in the elections in all of the states where Agora is working. So that should be interesting.
Wow. Yeah. So the formation of the Arizona Democracy Resiliency Network really spun off into you being that organization, you and Ron, being a part of a lot of other similarly minded side stuff, right? So I can't even keep a track of. You tell me all the time you're going to somewhere else. I'm like, it sounds like that's a lot of work.
Yeah. Well, the truth is, Kevin, people ask me if I'm worried about the elections, and I'm not so much worried about what's happened up until today, election day.
Yeah.
I am worried about what's going to happen over the next month or two.
Right.
So I am a little worried about that. But one of the reasons I have hope and optimism is that there's so many groups working in similar space that we are and trying to do the right thing and to keep integrity and trust in our elections. That's where I end up going with signs of hope and optimism.
Right.
Because there are literally, I don't want to say hundreds, but there are probably, I'm aware, and I'm connected to probably 40 or 50 various organizations, some locally based, some with operations, nationally based, but with operations here. And we're connected in many different ways. You can get connected on apps now. There's like the Signal app, a lot of people are familiar with that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a group called the Democracy Defense Coalition on a Signal chat. We've also had a couple of day-long meetings together over the past couple of years. There's probably 30 active groups in that app, and we connect with each other on a daily basis.
Oh, wow, really?
About what's happening across the valley and across the state. And if there's a crisis happening in Gilbert, that app can be activated. And if we need to send some people down there to kind of watch to see what's going on, then we can do that.
Really?
So
it's like a Slack channel for political integrity.
Yep. And they're all, we're not all exactly doing the same thing, but we're all pretty much in the same space of trying to basically, for lack of a better description, trying to preserve our democracy.
Right.
That's really what it comes down to. I'm also involved with a group with Valley Leadership.
Yep.
They put together what they're called the civic engagement team.
Okay. And
that's all about educating people on what's right and wrong with our elections and trying to build trust that way and doing as much outreach as they can and Valley Leadership's a pretty big organization. It's been around for a while, kind of like Scottsdale Leadership, but it's more Valley-wide. And I think it's older than Scottsdale Leadership is as well. So they're doing some pretty good work, and I joined their civic engagement team.
Oh boy,
which is helping them, work on election issues with the information that I can share with them that we compile in the ADRN work that we're doing. There's another group here called Secure Democracy USA, which is a national organization with local affiliates, and they do a lot of work here in Arizona as well, pulling people together, working on election issues. So. And the other thing I might mention too, which I thought was a delightful surprise, was how engaged the faith community is.
It really?
We've got in our network of 300 or so people across the state, we've got about 75 faith leaders.
Wow!
And they're all
almost
in.
a third.
Yeah, they're active. We're good. We did a prayer vigil last night, as it turns out, the night before Election Day, statewide prayer vigil that we did in partnership. We helped support. We're a sponsor with the Arizona Faith Network on that. And that brought together religious leaders from all 8 or 9 different denominations, if you will, to sit there and offer prayers for a safe democracy and safe election season. Yeah.
How engaged is that faith community? Because it seems like you're a clergyman. If you got too deep into one side or the other, you might lose parishioners.
It's a tough chore. It's a tough chore if you're the leader of a more traditional church. You got to be careful about how you talk about politics. Because you got people from the right, people from the left all in your congregation, and you want them all to be a part of your congregation. So it's a balancing act. So what ends up happening is it's usually like the Arizona Faith Network is very active politically and very progressive, and they do a great job. But they also represent every faith that you can imagine. It's a part of that faith network. So when they speak, they kind of speak for everybody. Mm-hmm. So that kind of helps position them in the middle where it's safe to talk about these kinds of things. But there are ways to talk about our democracy without taking a stance R or D. And,
there absolutely is.
You just talk, how do you
look at how many independents we have, right?
Exactly.
One of the ballot measures on the ballot this year is to let independents vote in primaries, which I'm all for.
Yeah, I am too. Yeah. There's a lot of people that don't like that as well, but that one I think is a good measure.
Yeah.
There's actually, I was looking at the latest stats, there's actually more independents than it's slight. There's like 1.5 million registered Republicans in Maricopa County, 1.3 Democrats and 1 million independents.
Oh, okay.
So it's almost
close.
a third. And we'll see which way they go. But yeah, the open primaries things is an important piece. Going to be very curious to see where that ends up going.
Right.
As we work through that. The other thing I might mention is we're going to be putting on an event December the 11th with a group called Disagree Better Arizona. That's an effort led by Mesa Mayor John Giles and Tempe Mayor Corey Woods. That we're gonna put on an event with them December the 11th. So this will be after the dust settles, hopefully, from the election, where they can talk to a group. We'll get probably 80 or 100 people, hopefully, to the event where Woods and Giles, both mayors, will talk about ways. And Giles is a Republican, Woods is a Democrat.
Right.
How do you talk to each other about this stuff?
Hey, is Giles not running for re-election?
He's not. No,
I didn't think so.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. He wasn't in the primary then.
No, and Mayor Giles was one of the leaders of the Republicans for Harris campaign.
Yeah.
And so he's taking a lot of flack from hardcore Republicans, but he's one of the salt of the earth kind of guys.
Yeah.
The Bill Gates of the world, Stephen Richards, Rusty Bowers, John Giles. These are, conservative, used to be Republican leaders. Now they're conservative leaders because the Republican Party has gone askew.
Yeah.
But they've stood up for what's the right thing to do. And they've taken a lot of flack for that, but you got to admire them for the way they've handled themselves and tried to do the right thing.
Wow. Now tell me a little bit about the other group. I can't remember the name of it, but you're working with Jane on some stuff. And
Jane and I started a group called the Conservative Agenda for Arizona, but we decided Jane Anderson's with Mormon Women for Ethical Government.
Really? Okay.
And she leads that effort here in Arizona, and she's also part of our ADRN. And Jane and I got connected at the Agora meeting back in April. And we've stayed together, and now we're working on some things together. We're gonna work on a different way of moving the conservative agenda forward.
Okay.
And so right now we're in talks with several people about ways that we might be able to partner up with some conservative groups to do the kind of mission work that Jane and I want to do.
Right. Okay. That sounds exciting.
And that's basically to get conservative leaders feel like they've got the backing and the support system to be able to stand up and cry foul when they see something going on with the elections that aren't quite right, like election deniers and things like that.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
So a lot in our hands, man. I know you've been up to speed on all that stuff, and you're active with a lot of this stuff as well. So today is election day. If people are tuning in on the Tuesday that this podcast drops, we won't know the results when this is out for most of our races because it takes Arizona up to 13 days to do all of the races.
Right.
Some they can call a little bit earlier, but it takes time.
That's another thing I think has also been changing that I think people are aware of is how complex the voting system is, all the infrastructure behind it. And the fact of the matter is more people are voting than ever been voting before.
Right.
More people are registered to vote than ever been registered before. So it takes longer for that whole system process. We have many ways to, obviously in-person counting, standing in line and voting on election day is the quickest way, but some don't start those ballot countings of mail-in ballots till after that's all over with, right?
No, they count the mail-in ballots as they come in. But what they don't count, and this is why the simplest way to explain why it takes so long, if they don't count is when people go on election day, come with their mail, with their early voting mail ballot that they've already filled out, and they put it in that box.
I see.
What happens then is
it doesn't get counted right then.
Doesn't get counted right then because they still got to cure those ballots.
Yeah.
So when you vote in person at your voting center, not with an early voting ballot, but with the ballot at the vote center, that gets counted right away.
Yeah.
So it goes right into the count. What does not get counted is the early voting ballots that come in on election day, because then they got to be taken down to the MTech Center and the Maricopa Voting Center in downtown Phoenix, and they got to be cured. And by being cured, that means they got to look at their signatures.
Exposed to air and the right. They got to be like kind of wine, like curing wine.
Yeah, I wish it was curing wine. They all might need a little bit of whiskey after that's all over. But when you're curing a ballot, it means they goes through the whole process, which all the mail-in vote ballots go through. But you have time to do that before election day.
So they got signature verification.
They got to open them. They got to verify the signature, and then if the signature's wrong, they got to go back and check on them.
Yeah,
and they got to take through that whole process. That doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
So, and the problem is there's going to be a lot of people, many thousands of people, they're going to drop their early voting ballots off on election day, where if they just put them in the mail a week before, we could probably count our votes in a day or two instead of 7 to 13 days afterwards.
Okay, well, I got a confession to make. I used to be one of those guys that used to bug up the network, I guess, because the last 2 elections I have voted by mail,
right,
and sent them in early, like I did this year and the election prior to that. But for me, I always liked the experience. I didn't like waiting in lines, but waiting along a line. Nobody likes to do that. But I also like the process of going down and just seeing other people voting, getting your sticker as you leave. Yeah. That was part of the process and the experience. So I did that. I was one of those guys. I took it down there and I stopped doing that. But looks like I was one of the guys who was mucking up the system.
You were. I'm glad you see the law. I'm glad you've seen the light. But think about this also, is one of the reasons it gets more complicated is that we have so many races now that are really close.
Yeah.
And so you can't call them.
No, yeah.
Before you could call them, if somebody's up by 50,000 votes, you only got 20,000 left to count.
Yeah.
Well, you can probably call it, right?
Yeah.
But now they're all close. A lot of them are close.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I'll mention before we bring this to a wrap is the legislator has lowered the threshold significantly for automatic recounts.
Yes.
So now we're going to have a whole lot of races. And even if you look back in the primary, the midterm 2022, there was a lot of races back then that would have gone to automatic recount under the threshold that we now have.
Well, does one of the new laws in Georgia, doesn't that require them to be doing a recount automatically, a hand count?
I think they took that. I think they tried to do that, but it didn't win.
It didn't win.
Didn't pass through.
I mean, so why even have mail-in voting if that's the law that you have to do that? I mean, it would take my gosh, Georgia would take forever to vote.
Yeah, that's why they didn't do it. They wanted to hand count everything.
Yeah,
and that's crazy.
Yeah,
that's just crazy. So even in Maricopa County, they do audits. Every election gets an audit, and part of the audit is doing a sampling hand count to make sure that the voting machines are tracking the right way. And they've always looked that it's always been working out.
And if that samples is off, then they can go ahead and
do a full recount. Yeah,
do a full recount. Okay.
Yep. Lots of stuff, Kevin. It's been a great conversation today.
Don, you are a champion of our city. I wanted to do it this way today because I wanted to bring some awareness of how hard you're working. You're supposed to be retired and playing golf.
That didn't happen.
Right? Yeah. And still, I think you're working. You were the former editor of the Business Journal, and you think you're working as hard now?
Yeah, I'm probably working as hard. It's a little bit easier because I get to work from home.
Yeah.
A lot of the Zoom stuff. A lot of the stuff we do is statewide and national. So a lot of stuff automatically is by Zoom. So a lot of in-person driving around, that kind of stuff. A little bit, but not as much as there used to be.
All right.
So I would say the hours going into it now are pretty much, the day's pretty full, but I'm not playing as much golf as I'd like to.
Nobody is.
Nobody is, that's for sure. But hope you all playing some golf. Hope you all voted. Hope you all get the candidates that you want, which means that half of you are going to be very unhappy and half of you will be very happy.
That's right.
But that's the way we are. That's democracy. Let's settle this thing. If there's recounts to be had, let's do them. If there's legal challenges to be had, let's do them. It's all part of the process. But when those are said and done, let's accept the results and move on.
Right.
Peacefully.
In a peaceful way.
Yeah. That's good stuff, man. So I hope you all voted today. And thanks to all of you for listening. I hope you'll stay with us. I hope you'll share our podcast with your friends and neighbors, and hope you'll tune in for the next edition of Today and Tomorrow in Scottsdale.